today I'm very happy to have back Amy E. Sousa, aka at Known Heretic. Amy has a Master of Arts in Depth Psychology as well as 20 years experience as a theater educator and is an engaged embodiment expert using boundaries, somatic development, theater, and depth psychology to help people strengthen their intuition, imagination, and inner. Amy posts regularly on Twitter and YouTube about issues related to women's rights, and I asked her to join me last time to talk about the growing reality of trans activism and its effect on women. Today, Amy has returned for a continuation of our discussion, and this time we're going to dig deeper on the origins of the trans movement, what has triggered this new wave of thought, and where it is going. Also, by the end of our discussion, I hope to uncover the concerns I believe we both share about how this affects gender non-conforming people and the enforced language that continues to encroach on everyday life. Amy, thank you so much for talking with me again today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
So, last time we got into a variety of things, and this time before we got into the recording, we talked off camera and we were sort of figuring out where we're going here. And the place that I wanted to start was just, I guess, to ask this question of how did we get here? I know that's sort of broad, but how did we get here, Amy? How did we get here? How did the trans movement get to the point to where it has the influence that it has now, and to such a degree that there is a sense of fear? If this is something that you don't buy into, then you are living with a sense of like, you got to be careful what you say and who you say it to, because you never know, what might happen. And there is a sense of aggression. There's some retaliation.
Yeah.
If you don't say things in the way that they want it to be said, then you're running the risk of your reputation, and that's something that I think I've been just have a lot of respect for what you've done and what you're doing, because you just kind of put yourself out there, and you're kind of one of those people who's like, I don't care what you say about me, I'm just going to say it, and this is how it is. So I'm glad that you came back today for a continuation of our discussion from last time. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And I am like that. I do say what I think. But, and I have to say that is due to a lot of work. It's due to the work that I've learned, and, that is the work that I offer, because I think without a strong sense of personal integrity and emotional resilience, it is really hard to buck the system. It's hard to be a nonconformist. I don't remember if I said last time, but one of the things that I sometimes say about this is that, it's a little analogy, but in Oedipus, he was, he's a person who broke every single social taboo. So he's a person who, incest and patricide and every possible taboo, he broke it. And his punishment at the end of that play is not death, but banishment. Banishment is the ultimate punishment. So this social capital rather, and being cancelable, that's a pretty significant social consequence. And to be able to stand up in front of that kind of a consequence, it takes a lot of inner strength, which is really having a very strong sense of authority in oneself. I trust myself. I trust my own values, and I have such a strong sense of my own integrity that there's really nothing that anyone can do to throw me off balance. I may have my feelings hurt, I may get kicked around a little bit, but it's kind of like that weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Like I come right back to my own internal equilibrium. So, but to answer the question, how did we get here?
Yeah.
So This is a very worthy question because it's one that is complex and it's hard to see in perspective because there is a lot of sloganeering and propaganda creation around this entire movement, and I think it's really important to point out. So as I talk about what's going on, I want people to think about the kind of propagandas that have been used in other totalitarian movements that we have seen. So this movement uses some of those same tactics. It uses, for example, bright colors. Look at the flags they use. Look at the gingerbread person. Look at all of the unicorns. And look at the drag queens and the rainbows. There's a lot of colorful emblems. There's also a lot of forced positivity. So they use words like affirmation and validation, and inclusivity, and all of these words give you a feeling of positivity, but these words are really twists on what is really going on, because affirming someone's sex denialism is not affirming reality. So it's a rejection of the reality of what is. So it's not really affirming. Or being inclusive of men in a women and girls locker room is actually intrusive. It's a boundary violation. What was the other one? Validating, seeking external validation constantly and requiring and coercing other people to externally validate you. That is actually a sign of extreme insecurity, and it helps keep you being a good consumer, because if you are constantly requiring a loop of external validation, you can never be centered. So all of these forced positivity things are tactics, and we need to think of them as sloganeering words. So this my friend Kay Yang, who is the deprogrammer, who would be also a worthy guest for you, she really breaks this down very well, because this is an agenda at work. This is a really global agenda. This is not a phenomenon.
Just to interject really quick, like, I've heard so many people get upset when you say that there's an agenda.
Well, it's very uncomfortable, right? Because the sloganeering also includes the idea that this is, a movement of oppressed people, fighting for their rights. But it's very easy to see that this is not a movement of oppressed people. This is a top-down, constructed narrative. It's a top-down constructive narrative, and we can see it very easily when we look at who is behind it. So if we or even before we look behind it, we can just look at the what is. So just looking at what is in front of us. So when you think of an oppressed group, do you think of a group that is supported by every single major NGO? Do you think of a group that is supported by every single major corporation? Sure. Do you think of a group that is being promoted in the universities, in education, is being promoted by the President of the United States, who has created multiple executive orders? So this is government, education, corporation. This is not a movement that's bucking the system. Right. This is organized and constructed by the system. So it's not it's not a movement of the oppressed, but that's the narrative that they're creating. That's the Hollywood story. And in fact, that's another example. This is all over Hollywood. This is on your Netflix. This is in the media. Right. And there's only one story being told. That's another key. There is one story, and the other side of the story that's saying, we want to have boundaries around our body for women. We do not want our kids to be dissociated from their bodies. We don't agree that kids are born in the wrong body, and we don't agree with child medicalization and sterilization and mutilation. That side of the story doesn't get told. No
So
one,
controversial.
no one will platform it.
It's ridiculous. Like everything you just said, it's like why wouldn't anybody want to be for those things? But
Yeah.
there's something that you posted once that really stood out to me, and I felt just nailed it. Was luxury cult.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
that's about the size of it. I feel like
Yeah.
that really gets to the heart of the matter. It's because to some degree, if I'll say it this way, is it's like people who feel like they have a right to medical surgery of whatever sort, and then everybody else has to go along with it as well. I can kind
Mhm.
of agree with the first part, but not the second part to some degree, in that, okay, it's a free country, people can do what they want to do, but then where it kind of is then kind of a personal thing of like, is this something that I would advise somebody to do? If somebody came to me and said, hey, this is something that I am thinking about doing, then my honest opinion is no, I don't think it's a good idea. You can do
Yeah.
it, it's an option, but should you? And this is kind of where it's become like you can't even have that opinion,
No.
right? You can't even take the position of like, no, I don't think it's a good idea, and I think you should consider other possibilities.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't think it should be allowed. We don't allow, there is a kind of disorder, maybe you can look it up and fill it in later. I forget what it's called, but there's a disorder where you can be dissociated from other body parts. So you want to cut off your limb. There's, and now they're calling it. Now they're going to try to loop it in the trans umbrella
Sure.
and calling it transabled.
Yeah.
But people have flown to other countries, and where doctors here won't perform them yet,
Hmm.
but doctors in other countries will perform these surgeries where you might cut off your leg at the knee or cut off your arm.
Hmm.
But we don't allow that here because we understand it's a mental illness, and we don't allow people to do it.
Hmm.
Or there's that famous guy who had did all those plastic surgeries to his face until he looked like this kind of Catwoman character,
Right.
and sharpened his teeth and did
Yeah.
all kinds of weird stuff. Well, he had to fly to other countries to do that. I
Hmm.
mean, no one should have allowed it, but we don't allow it here because that is a sign. Cutting on yourself, that's a sign of mental distress. That's a
Hmm.
really fast sign of mental unwellness. It is not instinctual to cut on yourself.
Hmm.
Instinctually we avoid pain. And when I say, it's a luxury cult belief, obviously the cult part is because this is supernatural. The belief that someone is born wrong, the belief that someone is other than a man or a woman or a
Hmm.
boy or a girl. That's a supernatural anti-reality belief. Every single human being is one sex or the other. No one here is unsexed, and there's no third sex. There is no third gamete.
Hmm.
And differences of sexual development, DSD disorders, which some people still incorrectly call intersex, but they are DSD conditions. These are still people who have one primary sex or the other with abnormalities of development, but they are not people who have or produce. They are not people born from a third gamete, nor are they people who produce a third gamete. There is no third. There's no other. And the luxury part of this idea of a luxury cult belief is that there is so much privilege involved in transition. So it takes a lot
Sure.
of privilege to be able to afford
Sure.
the time and the money
Right.
to go through these procedures. And
Yep.
that is why we see the vast majority of people who are caught up in this cult come from quite affluent
Sure.
backgrounds.
Sure.
Because even with insurance supplements, a lot of these surgeries are only done in very particular cities. So it requires traveling to a whole other city, staying in a hotel,
Mm-hmm.
before and after these surgeries. And also the surgeries, the sex surgeries, which they call reassignment, but I would just call, extreme plastic surgery or
Sure.
extreme body modifications.
Sure.
These extreme body modifications, they have a 67% rate of requiring follow-up surgeries. So even if this was something fully covered by insurance, which it's not, but even if it was, think about all of the money in time off of work
Sure.
that is required. Who has the time to take multiple, like, 6 weeks time off of work?
Sure. Right.
I mean,
People with
this is
money.
a this is a privilege.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a privilege.
Right.
Having any plastic surgery is a privilege. This is a cult of extreme body modification.
So to pull at this
And
thread a little bit, like I'm just what do you think? We live in a time right now where what you have available to you in terms of surgeries and medicalization of various sorts. So the question I have is, should we be allowed, like what is it, how far is it that we should be allowed to go, and at what point does a higher authority come in and step in and say, no, you can't do this anymore?
Well, I don't think mentally ill people should be allowed to make these decisions about themselves. I think this is, I think it constitutes medical malpractice, because I think it goes against the do
Mm,
no harm dogma. And even frigging tattoo artists will not give often will
sure.
not give people extreme tattoos. It is very hard to find a tattoo artist, who will, tattoo all over your face.
Right.
They it's there's a lot of there's ethics even about, like, you can't get one if you're drunk, and you can't, I mean, there's even with just a simple tattoo, there is a lot of ethics involved about who has enough stability to get one and where they can be done.
Mm,
But so this, I don't think we should allow it even for adults. And you
mhm.
see a woman like Scott Nugent, who was had to be, ridden in a helicopter because she was, dying because of sepsis and other conditions.
Mm,
She has no mobility in her arm because that phalloplasty surgery
yeah.
ruins nerves and tendons. Why? She looks back and reflects in horror, because why did they let her walk down that
Sure.
path? I mean, she's an adult,
Mm,
but she was also caught in a notion, and an anti-reality notion. Now, as someone who has a psychology background, any other delusion that someone comes to you with, any other kind of psychosis, you ground the patient, your client, in reality. Someone comes to you with anorexia or schizophrenia or paranoia or hypochondria,
mm,
and any of these situations that are causing a mental delusion, you ground the
mm,
patient in the reality of their situation, of their environment, of, the physical material plane and their bodies. You don't allow them to sort of go through this mental
mm,
cycle and treadmill of anxiety and psychosis, really.
mm.
This is a very odd cultural phenomenon, but it's a psychic, phenomenon, in the sense that people really do experience this anxiety around it, but it's also really fed so much by the culture. And I want to say one other thing, which kind of brings it back to the very original question about where did this come from. I would also encourage anyone to follow Jennifer Billick and her 11th Hour blog, because she really tracks the money.
Jennifer's
So
awesome.
we see
Yeah.
a lot of billionaire influence seeding this into the narrative. And there are papers written by Denton's law firm that specifically go through how this would be seeded into the government, and into our legislation and into the schools, without the part of the process that is public comment or feedback. So that is why we should all be recognizing, where did this come from, because it popped on the scene.
Sure.
Unbeknownst to us. This wasn't like a gay rights movement or the suffragettes women's movement, where we saw little things, little things, little things, little things, little things,
Right.
and gradually over time there was shifting. This has been, in
The
like
last
the
10
last
years. Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and mostly, concentrated in the last 5, like just pushed onto the scene. And there's a lot of forced teaming with lesbian, gay, and bisexual movements. So they've forced teamed with the LGB. They've also done a lot of forced teaming with feminism.
Sure.
If your feminism doesn't include, quote, trans women, it's not feminism. So there's a lot of forced teaming involved to get to work on people's sympathy, and that's why I always try to get people to see this is a lot of sloganeering, like pay attention, that this is, Noam Chomsky calls this manufacturing consent. We have been left out of the public commentary process, and this sloganeering and propaganda is used to pull the wool over our eyes, and it's highly effective. It's hard to see your way out of it.
Sure. I feel like just talking about how this is tried to been sold as part of the feminist movement, as an aspect of it, seems like a good way to lead into what we were talking about earlier about denominations of feminism. And that's something that we left off our last conversation, and it was something that I really wanted to continue forward on, because I think as a male, it's hard to understand what my relationship is to feminism, especially when there is oftentimes a very differing opinions within. And I think that just kind of what we were talking about earlier. I think this exists with any school of thought, whatever it might be. There's always going to be different denominations of thought, different sort of, this is what I think is true, and no, this is what I think is true, and you're going to hell because you don't agree with what I say. It's like this is it's a human reality, right? It's not segregated to any specific group of people. It's something that you find in all sorts of different schools of thought. And in this case, what I wanted to do is just see if I could ask you if you could disentangle that somewhat for us, and just kind of give us an idea of the different kinds of feminism out there, and just where do you put yourself in all of that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I get, I get that it's hard for men because, women
I cry myself to sleep on a regular basis.
yeah, well, women can get really touched. Women can get really touchy about this. It's really
Sure.
touchy. And men don't. I don't think men really. I don't think men really have to. I mean, it's great if men take the steps to understand this, but it's not super necessary, because if you don't, first of all, men never need to really call themselves a feminist, because feminism first and foremost centers females. So it's about centering. It's about centering the needs of women. So men don't have to know it. And also, men shouldn't call themselves feminists, especially because they probably haven't done the research and haven't done the analysis. Like, I know this much about Marxism, some of which I know is good, some of which I know is, not so great, but I should never call myself a Marxist without, delving into the matter of the material, so, and I don't think any woman should even call herself a feminist without delving into the actual material and the research. So, as I mentioned to you in our more private conversation, yeah, there are many sort of sects of feminism, and I don't personally right now call myself a feminist. And it's not because I don't have a lot of feminist analysis in my background. I do. But I think the term itself has become so so muddied, so filled with multiple connotations and values that it's both confusing and divisive. Right. So it's not useful to me.
Hence the question.
Yeah, hence the question. It does not a useful term to me. And all I have to say about myself is that I am a women's rights activist. I am an activist on behalf of women and children having boundaries around our bodies and having bodily autonomy. But I will say, so my background is radical feminism. If I was going to put myself in a sect of feminism, then my research is radical feminism. And if I were to call myself a radical feminist, I would say that I was so because I happen to agree with the analysis. And the radical in radical feminism means root. So radical feminism is looking at the root of female oppression and the observation that it's making. It's making an observation about culture. We often refer to it as patriarchy, which just really means structures, institutions, systems that are set up, one, to support men, but two, systems and structures and institutions that are set up specifically to exploit the female reproductive capacity. So radical feminism in its aim is a liberation movement, and that is where the term women's lib came from. This is a liberation movement. It's seeking liberation from reproductive exploitation. So it was never set up to be an equality movement. Because to have equal rights within the patriarchy, would be like, well, right now, the FBI and the MOJ in the UK report that over 99% of all rapes are committed by men, and over 88% of all of the victims are women and girls. Well, within an equality movement, then we would be like, well, women would be raping 50% of the time. We don't want that we don't want equality with that. We want liberation from that. We want liberation from patriarchal exploitation of our reproductive capacity and bodily autonomy, and liberation from oppressive roles that project sex stereotypes onto our body. So it's actually the sex stereotypes that we call gender liberation from gender roles projected onto our body. And this exploitation is for profit. So we see this profit in terms of trafficking, porn, prostitution, surrogacy, and in things like even like child marriage, that's a for-profit industry, and forced pregnancy. So there's a lot of profit being made. There's even currently profit being made off the biological byproducts of women's birth and labor. So Dr. Suzanne Veerling speaks very eloquently to this. So women's umbilical cords and amniotic fluids and placentas are sold, taken from them, as biological waste, but then the hospitals turn around and sell them for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wow. So there is a lot of profit being made off of women's reproductive labor and reproductive capacity. So that's where that sense of exploitation comes in. It's literal. It's not, yes, we would like equal work for equal pay, but the root of radical feminist analysis is talking about something much deeper than that. And then in the sort of 60s, with the new wave of feminism, more like the 70s. This was a little later, came this new wave, and that's the equality feminism. That's the version of equal pay for equal work, which is great. There's nothing wrong with it, but it also became, an equality of sexual exploitation. Like, women are free to be as sexually promiscuous as they please. Women are free to practice sex work. They have the authority to sell their bodies if they want. Well, and I said this to you before, but someone once said to me, if it gives men an erection, it's probably not feminism. It's just probably not, because what feminism is grappling with is, that seedier side of the actual exploitation. But that equal rights kind of Gloria Steinem feminism was like pushing women to get into the workplace in an equal capacity. Well, that's not really fair in a way to women, because women are always going to bear the burden of reproduction. Men don't have, there is some burden in being a father. I honor men who are fathers and the work they put into it, but it is not an equal situation. Women bear the burden of reproduction through their pregnancy and through much of early childhood. Babies and young children have a strong attachment to the mother for very good reasons. And these reasons are, part of mammalian evolution, and specifically human evolution. And human babies, because of how they are born, require a lot more personalized and intimate care because of our brain development and how we walk and all kinds of different evolutionary developmental physical reasons why this developmental process is so long for human, and why that attachment is required also for so very long. So to put women in a position where they're fighting for equal amounts of jobs as men, that is ultimately a denial of our embodiment, because our embodiment simply is different. And there are certain sects of social justice type feminists who would disagree with me. There are sects of feminists who want to be separatists than men. There are sects of feminists who are anti-natalists, who do not think that women should give birth. To me, as someone who values embodied awareness, I am very much focused on honoring our differently unique embodiment. I honor the way men are embodied. I honor the aggression that goes along with testosterone. I think that can be very well channeled. It does not have to be channeled into violence. I honor that women are life givers. That's whatever. Some
pretty controversial stuff you're saying here, Amy.
I know. It can be to certain people, because some people might argue that I'm some sort of a biological essentialist. But I am simply honoring what our bodies do and are capable of. And, if there's anything that I think is worth believing, that there is some kind of magic in the universe, it's that the female of the species can gestate and bear life,
Yeah.
like make life in her friggin' body. I mean,
I'm,
it's like,
I made this
it's
point to
cool.
somebody on Twitter,
Yeah.
and they were telling me how misogynistic I was being.
Mm.
I was like,
Well,
every woman has been the gateway of life since the dawn of time,
yeah,
and they were like, you misogynist pig, and I'm just like, I thought I was
yeah.
paying them a compliment, but
You are, you are. But there's a lot of women who, there will be a lot of women who disagree with what I say. There will be some that do agree, but feminists themselves, in a sense, in pushing that equality narrative, um, there, I think that mothers partially got denigrated along the way.
hmm,
Not every feminist does or did do this, but some did. Some did devalue motherhood
hmm,
and really looked down on the housewife. Looked down on the mother who doesn't have a job. I mean, you hear that all the time. Like, if someone says, like, what do you do? And a woman says, like, I'm raising my kids. And they're like, well, what else do you do?
yeah,
As if that is not enough,
sure,
as if raising a friggin' human being is
right,
not like
right,
powerful and amazing enough.
absolutely,
Um, and I know my own mother whose dream was always to be a mom. That was her childhood dream. How friggin' lucky am I that I had a mom whose dream was to be a mom,
sure,
and in that sense, I did very much have a dream mom because she did all kinds of creative activities with us and educational activities, and
hmm,
she spent a lot of time and attention doing these things. Um, and again, this is not to say that women can't be amazing mothers and hold down a career, but it is to say that there is a lot of social pressure and social devaluing of women who choose to put their full attention on being mothers and child rearing. It's very culturally devalued. Now, women are in a horrible bind because also women are also vilified for focusing on their career and not being at home enough. So
sure,
women are in a pretty horrible double bind when it comes to this, and that's part of this structural system because this is where we start looking at patterns and we look at how one sex is treated in their parenting versus non-parenting versus the other sex, and you see that there are a lot of social pressures on women, no matter what path they go down, that men are simply not subjected to these same kind of external cultural pressures.
sure,
Um, yeah, and I do think that there is also this pathway of feminism, although this so okay. So although the trans agenda is very anti-woman, it's this gender industry and the entire thing is anti-woman. It's a boundary violation movement. It's a men's entitlement movement
sure,
to exploit and violate women's boundaries. So it's anti-feminist. It's very anti-feminist to think that men could be women. That's anti-feminist. And
hmm,
we can see that there are liberal social justice type women who consider themselves women. I'm sorry, consider themselves feminists, like women like AOC,
sure,
women like Kamala Harris, women like Chelsea Clinton. They think they're good feminists,
hmm,
and they are also spouting trans women are women, like
hmm,
they're in a freaking trans cult,
yeah, yeah.
so
Has your opinion of her changed? I'm picking on AOC right now, but has your opinion of her changed? I used to have a pretty positive opinion of her, but like many Democrats, my opinion of them is kind of diminished significantly, and she's kind of
I
on that list. But I'm just curious.
Well, I have, my personal education. This is not necessarily my college or my postgraduate education. But my personal education of myself, I've always loved like Noam Chomsky and his, Manufacturing Consent, Chris Hedges, Empire of Illusion,
Mm-hmm.
Derek Jensen, and Endgame, and you know, I've um, I've followed a lot of thinkers who have a lot of critique about culture and have a lot of observations about how the system is very rigged. And so I've been very disillusioned by our political
Me
system
too,
for a
Amy.
very
Me
long
too.
time. So I didn't ever tend to really trust her or like her, but I don't really have a tendency to trust or like many politicians. I
Right.
frankly did sort of embarrassingly get a little captured and had I had like some belief that Obama was
Sure.
like going to do some real things, and
Right.
that
You're
and that
speaking my
he was
language. Yep.
yeah, that he was really going to have some change. And then, like an idiot, I woke up from the dream and was like, oh, he's the problem. He has like a really he's charming and he's a good
Right.
actor, and he said a lot of beautiful things, but obviously, look at the situation that we're in. He doesn't care about women. He didn't codify Roe v. Wade.
Mm,
He does not care. It was not a priority to him.
mm,
And frankly, his campaign was largely bought and paid for by Jennifer Pritzker, who is one of the men billionaires who calls himself a woman, and his foundation,
mm.
and he helped fund Obama's campaign, and Obama is the one who really seeded all of this, trans BS into our government.
Yeah.
So Biden is just furthering the steps that the groundwork that Obama laid.
Right.
And so that's to say, no, I didn't love AOC.
No. Yeah.
That's my long-winded way.
I feel like, when Trump was around, I was like, oh God, this is a disaster.
Yeah, I
And
mean, he was terrible too.
yeah, and then my feeling was leading up to the election. If I was to just kind of sum it up, it's like I do feel that Biden is on some level the lesser of two evils, but boy, my opinion of him changed quick. When I think the big one for me was Rachel Levine, Secretary of Health. You know what I mean? Like, what a joke! Like, this is what we're this kind of so like I was thinking about something earlier. You were talking, and just when we're talking about dealing with people's psychological imbalances, and we're having a discussion about trying to find your best life, and sifting through the bullshit in order to try to get to that. It's not exactly easy when the culture itself is kind of against you, right? And the expectations, and what is available. I think, as a human being, there's probably this sense of, well, I mean, if it's out there and it's available, then it can't be that bad. And that I think is it's very close to why it is that I'm having conversations like this, because I do feel as though we have gotten to a point to where diagnosing imbalances, diagnosing our problems, and trying to come up with proper solutions to those problems. To me, I see that as a larger issue that we all share as human beings, in terms of sort of waking up out of a stupor of stupidity and ignorance based on a variety of things, and applying proper solutions to the issues that we face. And so to maybe use that as kind of a segue into another thing that was on my mind as we were talking, is just how the intentions of radical feminism were hijacked. And kind of what you're saying, it's like the intention is to be an advocate for female-bodied individuals, right, and to liberate their biology, or their reproductive capacity. So to me, this seems kind of like an obvious retaliation from the patriarchy, or however you might sort of see that, right? But just that is one of the threads in all of this that I am interested in pulling at. So just to kind of go further in this direction, like one thing that I became very aware of growing up in church is the patriarchal mythology that is dominant in our society, right? The form of God is only man. God is referred to as only a man. And this to me is an example of, as I was doing what I could to try to disconnect myself from my preconceived notions about things, I had that kind of, I guess it was sort of an epiphany, you might say. It was kind of this moment that you could say it this, I'm not saying this literally, but it was as though the voice of God spoke to me, and it was the voice of a woman, and she was upset that I had been ignoring her. I had been focusing all of my attention on this patriarchal notion of God and completely detached from the concept of the feminine divine. And I like to bring this up because I kind of feel like it's just an example of the different things that are that contribute to the disempowerment of women and their diminishment in society. That to me is a very prevalent thing. Is just the overwhelming belief in God as a male and the detachment of the feminine from the divine. It's just, what do you think of that?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things. So first, those the rise of the one God religions. So the one God religions, being Christianity and Judaism and the Muslim
Sure.
religion. Yahweh and
Sure.
Muhammad and
Right.
Jesus and
What
all of
is
these
the
things.
the predecessor? I think it is Zarathustrianism. That was a Babylonian
Babylonian,
monotheistic,
yeah.
right?
So the one God religions in themselves are a propaganda response to the goddess, the goddess religions.
Mm-hmm.
So the rise of the one God religions coincide with the fall of the goddess, and you notice that in their books,
Hmm.
there's a lot of propaganda vilifying women.
Sure.
And there's also a lot of propaganda that puts birth back into the powers of men. So there is some, connection to transhumanism and transness in these books. You see Eve being birthed out of Adam's rib.
Sure.
It's this total distortion of what's natural, where
Right.
men are for some reason the birth givers here,
Yeah.
and women
Mind blowing.
are.
Mind blowing. I mean, it really is. Like, honestly, I'm detached enough from it to be able to see it, and to see it, and to kind of be like, whoa, is this really like some sort of a strange outcoming of that? Something that's
Well, you see it in the Greek religions and the
Hmm.
Roman religions. You
Hmm.
you see Zeus bearing Athena out
Sure.
of his thigh.
Hmm.
Kronos gave birth to his children out of his head.
Hmm.
This idea that men can give birth.
Hmm.
I my belief is that it stems from a deep-seated, uh, well, it's both a jealousy and a means to control. So to give birth is powerful.
Hmm.
That is one of the most powerful capacities that exists.
Sure.
That is I mean, talk about like a superhero capacity, like
Sure.
to grow a human being out of the material of your own body.
Yeah.
That is powerful. And so that that's why the goddess cultures revered life givers and the goddess as powerful, because that is a powerful capacity. So the one god religions had to diminish and devalue that capacity. And they had to diminish and devalue it by spreading lies and propaganda and making men somehow into the life givers and punishing women, for their, so-called original sins. And devaluing that devaluing the actual natural power that women have. And then the stories that these books tell about women, these constitute propaganda for people to convince people to leave their goddess worshiping ways and to go along with this powerful sky god,
Right.
because the goddess was earthbound.
Sure.
The goddess was
Nature worship.
concrete, nature here, present. And the sky gods are totally abstract. They're absent, they're conceptual, they're elsewhere. So everything having to do with the goddess was actually very embodied. It was here, it was earthbound and material and sensual and tangible and touchable. And there was a very holistic quality to the goddess worshiping religions and tribes. And then everything that had to do with those one god religions were very abstracting. They're very conceptual. And so, it doesn't surprise me that this is the path of Western philosophy. This is the path that Western philosophy itself went down. So, this is the, I think, therefore I am. Not I am material, I am flesh and blood, I am born of a woman, I breathe, I have breath, therefore I am, but I think, therefore I am. That's Descartes, or Kant was the, mind is a machine. These are abstracting. So already in Western history, whether it's religion or philosophy, there's a lot of body dissociation. There's a lot of mind-body dualism that is itself dissociating.
I'd like to speak to this if that's all right, because you're really like pinpointing something that I think happened to me. My experience, is very, very the focus on the mind over the body, the focus on the spirit over the body, the defining the material realm as being evil and corrupt in its essence, right?
Yeah.
That for me very much detached me from my body. That very much kind of put me in, and I mean, and to be honest with you, to this day, it still has a lot to do with who I am as a person, but also I have at least recognized that there's a lack of balance.
Yeah.
That, when there's an overemphasis on the spirit and the mind, and a derision for the body and for the material world, then it's like, I think this feeds into that Christian idea of a corrupt world, a fallen world, and that's part of what I see as contributing even to just the environmental challenges that we're facing as human beings, the disconnect that we have from the planet itself, and sort of the way that we treat it. We don't treat it as sacred, as something holy. We treat it as something corrupt, and eventually it'll be burned up and destroyed anyways. And this, I think, is unfortunately feeding a lot of these larger things that are pushing us along. I'm really glad to have this conversation with you, because I think this is really getting at the heart of, at least for me, is what I sort of see as the issues that are connected to this. Yeah. One of those being the mythology, right?
Oh yeah, and so I can't remember if we got into this last time, so you'll have to stop me if it's a repeat. But if you look at the value system, so if you kind of just ignore what like trans means or is supposed to mean, and just look at the underlying values of an ideology that is basically a born in the wrong bodyism,
Mm-hmm.
and pushing medicalization and plastic surgery and reconstruction. So this is one, it's a dissociation from your actual body. Two, it's a cognitive dissonance in thinking, because now I can't name my own sense perceptions. I have to think about what I see. I'm not allowed to see a man and say I see a man. I have to be like, but maybe he's a woman. So it's a dissociation. It's a cognitive dissonance. It is compartmentalizing. So we compartmentalize the different body parts. We put boobs on a man, we make a flesh tube penis and put it on a woman, and then it's commodifying, because then these compartmentalized parts are interchangeable and commodified. We buy them and sell them. It's objectifying the human body, because the body becomes an object and an image. So it's not my embodiment that makes me female, it's my image of myself. Wow. That makes me a woman. So that's objectifying. So these are the underlying values that are at work if you're paying attention. So the healing part, or to combat those sort of negative values, we have to revalue our true essence. So the real nature of being is not a concept. It's not a conceptualizing. My being a female is to be on a particular developmental path. And the thing is no matter how I label myself, no matter how I think about myself, I am still on this path. My developmental path, whether you're talking about I'm on the developmental path of being an animal, I'm on the developmental path of being a mammal. That explains my development path. I'm on the developmental path of being a human, and I'm on the developmental path of being a woman. Whatever I think about myself, whatever I say about myself, however I label myself, that is the path that I am experiencing. It is always unfolding. I'm always experiencing it. So the revaluing is to revalue my particular situated embodiment. It's to revalue the instincts that go along with that embodiment. I think we did talk about instincts last time. It's to revalue my intuition and my own sense perceptions, my sensuality of what I see and hear and feel and taste, wow. What is material and in front of me. So it's to ground everything. Whereas the trans is abstracting. It's totally abstracting and it's conceptualizing. It's conceptualizing us, and I am trying to ground us in our materialness, in the reality of the material universe, not in some sort of an abstract conceptual ideation place.
Oh, man, there's just so much here to uncover, and I'm trying to see if I can grasp on something specific here. It's so difficult to try to chart a path that is balanced and healthy when you live in a world where so much is offered to you that takes you away from that. And so much of what is offered a lot of times comes in a form that seems very benign and very like, what's the big deal? And I think that there could, the risk, if you want to call it, is the feeling of like feeling detached from the rest of society and feel like you're missing out. You know, everybody else is having a good time and they're doing this and they're doing that and they're getting castrations and mastectomies. They're going, you know, having a party, right? And it's like there's this feeling that you have as a human of like feeling like you're missing out if you're not going along with what everybody else is doing. And
Yeah.
that is what's so, I think, difficult about this right now is that when you look at how much this has captured the public school system and just et cetera, for any kid who's growing up to within themselves, declare clearly that this is not something that they want to be a part of and that this is not something that they agree with, you run the risk of making yourself a social pariah. And
Yeah.
that is like, okay, do I do the hard work and do I take the road less traveled, or do I go along with the mob?
Yeah.
And that's so hard. That's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to like to say that you're like you just going along with the like not, you know, using pronouns and all that kind of stuff. Like it like a lot of people don't have the the data to be able to say this is why I don't want to use pronouns, and also have the bravery to maybe stand up in a work environment and say, hey, I don't like the fact that you are imposing your belief on me. This is a place I come to work and make money. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to be a part of this. When the corporate reality that we live in is, it's kind of this thing where it's like it's very hard to get away from it. And that I think is at the heart of the complexity of this whole conversation and why I would even want to have it. I think that there's, to some degree, there's no easy answer, but hopefully through the process of conversation, at least some answers can present themselves.
Yeah, and you know, it is hard to be a pariah, but you know, I think there is something that I think that there is a beauty to our lived integrity. So anyone who is able to live in integrity with their beliefs and their values is going to necessarily find a kind of power and freedom. You know, it's although it is uncomfortable, you know, at first to be unliked by many,
Sure.
and I have done this myself. Um, it is also incredibly freeing because I am no longer constricted. I no longer have to bow to other people and bend to what they want me to say. I get to have the empowered feeling of being like, no, I say what I see. I stand in my own beliefs. I am in integrity with myself. I have a sense of internal authority. I have a sense of internal equilibrium. You know, this is a kind of a power, and it also gives me a kind of a courage because I'm on solid ground. You know, I am grounded in what I'm saying. They are arguing with me from some, you know, abstracted conceptualized place where they're running through these ridiculous cult mantras and mental loopholes of delusion.
Mm.
So that's why they are so defensive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why they have to be on the offensive. They have to
Right.
be so attacking because ultimately they are in a place of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not grounded in the material of the universe, in the reality of the material universe, you are very insecure. If you are constantly seeking external validation, you are very insecure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that often happens to me with these trans activists from the other side is, you know, they love to tell me how ugly I am. They love to call me a man.
Oh.
But this is to say that they are so insecure that they think that to attack my looks is
Right.
going to have the same effect on me
Mm-hmm.
that it does on them. But I don't my value is not based on external validation. So I don't need their external validation. I don't need anyone's external validation. I have my own sense of worth within myself. I don't need you to like how I look or like how I talk, because I like it. I stand with it. So there's a lot of freedom in that. But I understand that it is very hard if you do not have the emotional fortification to do this, then it's going to be very hard. Sure. And I don't know if your audience will be familiar with the Ash conformity experiments of the 1950s. But what they did all these psychology experiments at different universities. The main experimenter's named Ash, of course, and they would have a whole classroom would be set up for this experiment. And every single person in the experiment was in on it except one guy. Everyone else is in on it. And they did this test multiple times. And it's a very simple test. They put 3 lines on a chalkboard, and then they just asked everyone in the room, in order, what do you see? And the first guy says, I see 3 dots. And the guy who's the only subject is like, I see 3 lines, but that's weird. That's weird that he said that. But then everyone else says it. I see 3 dots. 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 Everyone says it. And then when it gets to the guy who's, the lone subject, he's just like, I see 3 dots, because he has started to question his own sense of reality. And everyone else in the room has said it. And so it's just, it's a herd mentality. You go along with the herd and you conform to it. And very few people who went through this experiment, I don't know, like 1% or a very small percent. I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 or 3%, whatever it was. But a very small percentage of people sort of pass this experiment, because it's very hard to be a nonconformist, even if it means rejecting the reality of your eyes and ears. I mean, that's why books like frigging 1984 are written. They show us that humans will conform. They are willing to, that's that 1984 quote, when I don't remember the exact quote, but it's like, when Big Brother gets you to, reject, the authority gets you to reject the reality of your eyes and ears, like the authority has won. Yeah. And that is what this is a cult of. It is rejecting the reality that is in front of your eyes and ears. And you have to have a lot of internal emotional resolve not to go along with it. You really have to have a sense of internal fortification. But if you can have it, you're free. That's freedom. That is having freedom. If you go along with it, now you are beholden, to the cult. I know a woman who basically was coerced into like firing a person at her work. She was coerced by a bunch of other people who were like, that person's a bigot, that person's a transphobe, and she felt really pressured to fire this person. And the fact of the matter is, though, she ultimately made these people consultants in her business. She's now beholden to them. She's beholden to them and their beliefs, because she thought she would lose business if she didn't go along with them. But in fact, now she has tied herself to them. And it's, I can see that she's very uncomfortable now. And if she had just kind of pushed through that initial pressure and stood her ground and said what she actually believed, she would have a sense of freedom. She would have a sense of power, and even if it would have been uncomfortable to move through it, is to put yourself in a position of power, because you're saying, I will not be pressured by you. I will not be coerced by you, and I will stand in authority with myself.
Hmm.
And once you make yourself, someone who is a follower and pressured by other people, in a deep psychic place within you, that does not feel good. You've just subsumed yourself
Hmm.
to the will of others.
Hmm.
That in a psychology sense, that is not a feel good situation. That does not set you up for a healthy psyche.
Hmm.
That's a setup for a psyche that has a lot of anxiety, because
Sure.
now you have to keep up the pretense. Now
Hmm.
you have to keep dressing in the clown suit. Like you gotta keep juggling the balls.
For sure.
You can't just relax and be yourself.
Hmm.
I can just relax and be myself. I don't have to worry anymore about keeping up the performance for other people and doing and saying the right thing. I just say and do what is integrity with myself.
Hmm.
I get to relax and be free.
Let me see if I can pull my thoughts together here. There's so as a kid growing up in church,
Hmm.
what I kind of realized was at some point there's a difficult decision that needs to be made in the life of anybody who finds himself in a situation where they are being coerced by a community. And
Hmm.
it's very difficult, I think, for anybody, no matter which family you're a part of. If you are in any family, most people don't have the wherewithal to leave, to detach themselves from that situation until they're like 18. For me, it wasn't until I was like 23.
Yeah.
And to get to that point, to get to the point of going against the grain, going against the accepted narrative, I mean, the what was necessary for me to make that decision was not comfortable at all. It was not enjoyable experience. It was difficult and it took a long time, and there was a lot of stuff that I was just like, I know I don't like this, but there's not much I can do about it. Not unless I choose to run away from home. Not unless I choose to just outright, um, you know, uh, reject everything that my parents ever were trying to do for me. And so I kind of feel that there is a correlation between that and anybody who is a part of um, this growing reality of this kind of cult-like mindset that if you don't go along with it, there's something wrong with you, right? It's, to me, it is the same thing as somebody implying directly or indirectly that you're going to burn in hell for all eternity because you don't agree with us. And how dare you question us? That's the devil is trying to put doubts in your mind, right? I mean, when we're looking at the patriarchy and its control over people's minds, I mean, this is an example of it, right? The fear that keeps people in line it's what I find so concerning about all of this. It's why I find the trans movement so concerning, because I can see similarities between it and the rise of any major religion. The kind of thought patterns that sort of swirl around and eventually congeal into something that turns into a movement. And how many times in history movements like that have turned into inquisitions? They've turned into a reason to burn heretics. And, so it's like, this is why at this point I'm like, for myself, I realize that with great difficulty, I have put myself in a position to try to be as unbiased as possible. And that's not easy, because
Yeah.
everybody's trying to get you to pick sides. The left is trying to get you to pick sides. The right is trying to get you to pick sides. Like, everybody wants you to join their team, and everybody speaks with the same kind of conviction of like, you need to listen to me or you're wrong. There's something wrong with you. And I do hope that over a period of time through these discussions that this to me is really at the heart of what I'm hoping to kind of bring out through different discussions, is this reality of detaching yourself from certain things, the difficulty of it, and the benefit of doing so, despite the fact that it does put you in a position of, oftentimes puts you in a position of being in opposition to other people. It's I just looking at a lot of this stuff. When I just read your bio here, being an embodiment expert, helping people to get inside themselves more, is where I kind of see that. There's a pathway towards it. Would you maybe? I would almost draw a correlation between it and Jungian idea of individuation. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I studied, so depth psychology is a kind of archetypal psychology it's post-Jungian, post-Freudian. So, but Jung was definitely, a forefather of, the kind of psychology that I study. And Jung himself was very embodied in a lot of ways. He did activities of active imagination, and he did a lot of art. His Red Book is a piece of art. He did.
I want to buy a copy of that one of these days.
It's beautiful.
Do you
Yeah,
have
it's
a
beautiful.
copy?
I don't personally have a copy. My
Okay.
library has a copy. I would also like to have one eventually.
Yeah.
But I've seen copies, and they're quite gorgeous. They he did a lot of sand play. He did a lot of he made these little sculptures himself. He did a lot of sculpting. Um,
I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, he's great. And so the work that I do is grounded in some of this his notion of coming to a sense of self, and kind of listening to that inner self rather than the external ego needs, which are those ego needs are the validation needs. And it also comes from my background of theater, because theater in itself is embodied. So my dissertation really married this a little bit. So my dissertation really looked at how embodied creative practices can really build a sense of internal authority and an internal equilibrium, and internal integrity. And I very much am concerned about the notion of embodied awareness, one, for those reasons, for the kind of, so that one could have a sense of emotional resilience and integrity, and be in your values. And also because when faced against the kind of movement that we're faced with, things like instincts and intuition and sense perceptions, those are the primary building blocks of safeguarding. These are the things that really help you have excellent boundaries. And I like to use this metaphor that was given to me by my mentor. And it is a metaphor of the vacant house metaphor, is what we call it. So this vacant house, if you have a street, and at the end of the block there is a vacant house, and the vacant house is surrounded by a giant barbed wire fence. Maybe it's even got like that wrapped coil of barbed wire at the top, or all of those like stakey things sticking out, making it, so-called hard to get into. You will see that even so, kids will break in and hold their parties there. Drug dealers will break in and hold their drug deals there. People will let their dogs, take a dump on the lawn. People will throw their trash there. They'll throw bottles through the windows. That house will be used and degraded because everyone can see that it's vacant. So despite this great big barrier that's been put up, everyone can see the house is vacant. Meanwhile, just down the street, there's a house where the grass is mown, there's flowers in the planter box, there's curtains in the window, the light is on, you can smell the chicken roasting from inside the house, and you know what? There's no fence at all. No one breaks in, no one holds parties there, because they can see the house is fully occupied. So this is a metaphor to say that when we are fully embodied within ourselves, that is a natural boundary. And when you are dissociated from yourself, and you can be dissociated from yourself because of a trauma response, or you can be dissociated from yourself because you have a mental delusion that you're born in the wrong body. But when you are dissociated from yourself, it doesn't matter what kind of barrier you frantically put up in front of you. You are vacant and everyone can see it, and it sets you up for predation. It sets you up to be taken advantage of because you're not in yourself. So this work is very important for everyone, but very much for kids and for women, because to be able to rely on your instincts, if you can be in touch with your instincts and in touch with your intuition, you can be responsive to them, and that's your primary way of taking care of yourself. So it's a really primary safeguarding tool. Now, beyond the primariness of just keeping oneself safe, these things are important because this is how you build that resilience that I was speaking to before. This is building that sense of self. It's what I was talking about when I was saying, people can't throw me off kilter. They can hurt my feelings maybe. And again, maybe let's say that weeble wobble, but they don't fall down. They can, but I bounce back because I am, I have a sense of myself. I know my values. I live in integrity with them. So I can't be that is to be embodied. I can't be thrown off track in that way, and I can't be taken advantage of in that way, because I can supply my own psychological needs. If you are constantly seeking external validation from others, that necessarily puts you in an insecure position. So this work, which I like to do using embodied theater games, they're practices, because these things are skills. These are skills that can be practiced over time. You can gain mastery over these skills. And these skills help you to also feel your feelings. So that is another way of being dissociated, is not to feel your feelings. And we also have a culture that really devalues the emotions. People are very scared of their emotions. They're scared of expressing their emotions. They're scared of bad emotions. They're scared of pain. They're scared of shame. Now, in truth, life is long, and the fact of the matter is we're going to meet all of these things over and over again. I'm going to meet shame again. I'm going to meet pain again. I'm going to meet fear again. I'm not above, being emotionally resilient and having integrity doesn't mean being above these things. I'm not above pain. I'm not above shame. I'm not, there's no way to claim mastery above these kind of emotions. But what I am is I am more experienced at feeling my feelings so that when they do arise, just like if you've never swum in the ocean and a giant wave comes up, that's really scary and you don't know what to do and you run. And then the wave smushes you, it crashes you. But if you are proficient in the ocean, you dive right through,
Right.
and the wave passes over you,
I love it.
and you find yourself on the other side of it.
Sure.
And you're in calm ocean again.
Yeah.
But so these things are, cyclical, like waves. No matter my best efforts, something will come up to cause me fear or pain or shame. There's no way to get around this unless I think, honestly, I think even if I tried to hide from it so much that I, trapped myself, in my house all alone, because of the nature of humanity, these emotions will find you. So I think what I love about this embodiment work is it helps you see all of these sensations, whether they're physical sensations or whether they're emotional sensations, more neutrally, in a sense. Like, some people think I'm very like woo, but in a sense I think of these things as very practical. It's very informational. Emotions are simply information, and I think I spoke to you about this before, like, when you put your hand on a hot pan and you recoil, and that sensation is information.
Right.
Our emotional responses are also information, and they maybe are telling us to recoil. They're maybe telling us to go towards, they may be conveying a range of information. But to deny those sensations, that, even if they're emotions and not physical sensations, is to deny the information that they are attempting to convey. And I think that
That's
we
interesting.
need this in this culture. This has been devalued in this culture, and it is especially devalued within the cult ideology of sex denialism that we call trans. Kids especially are being dissociated not just from their bodies but from their own emotional responses. And they're being told that to grapple with their emotional responses, they need to cut and change and take drugs in their bodies.
Right.
I came up in the theater. I taught theater for 20 years. I have some similar background to you in that I was in a pretty traditional fundamentalist church that I was not necessarily comfortable in. It pushed me to I felt confined by it in many ways.
Sure.
And so I've always prized nonconformity. I've always wanted the kids that I worked with to express their uniqueness, to express their nonconformity to stereotypes, if that is what they were called to do. But I tried not to give anyone special attention. I think a lot of kids are given special attention for their nonconformity right now. And again, it pushes kids to this pressure stops allowing kids to explore, because like when they have, like I told you, this forced positivity of the rainbow flags, for example.
Sure.
There's all of these flags. So there's like a non-binary flag, there's a trans flag, there's a demi boy and a demi girl flag, there's a nutri-gender flag, there's a
Nutri-gender.
asexual flag, there's there's like thousands of these flags,
Sure.
there's all kinds of things. And then what they call cis, the cis flag, did you know, is gray and white.
Yeah.
I mean, which kid is going to choose that?
Yeah, for sure.
In a sea of just these colorful flags, who's going to choose the boring gray and white flag? So these kids are now, there's a different kind of coercion where they are not, it's not that, people think, oh, kids can explore. Well, they can't explore because they're being so pressured to self-define at such an early age.
Yeah.
And Jung has a great quote, that I'll paraphrase, I won't get it exactly right, but he says basically there is an issue when you set yourself down a path. So like say, like, for example, like I really want to be a lawyer. I set myself down the path. I do every single thing in education to be a lawyer. I do my internship. I finally get into a law firm. I finally make partner at this law firm. Now what? Like I actually, in a way, in some ways, in a psychological way, I have confined myself down a narrower and narrower
Sure.
path. Now, the example of the lawyer, that's a path that takes place over many, 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 many years, at which you could get off the train at any time. Also, this is it's true of any obviously it's true of any occupation, but he warns, the thing that he warns against is losing your sense of self through creating an identity that has become so narrow that you are no longer able to explore. Sure. So if that person, whether it's a lawyer or a doctor or whatever even an artist, whatever your vocation is, if you have so narrowly confined yourself into that vocation as an identity, then in a sense you have lost your ability to explore your inner self. And we are putting kids down these paths. This is not a path that they reach at the age of 35 after making partner or whatever. This is a path that we have set them down in friggin' kindergarten. Sure. This is being taught in preschools, and by kindergarten, people are asking them, what is their identity? Well, that is,
yeah,
and that's the most basic of psychological traps. I am not an identity label, and to just so narrowly define myself, now I've lost all freedom of exploration. And a kid, we're making kids lose their freedom of exploration. Yeah. Kids should be able to go through phases of cultural conformity, cultural nonconformity, weirdness, whatever. And of course, it never changes their developmental path. They are on a singular developmental path, whether it's human or a boy or a girl. But two, they are in a trap. This social transition is going to be mandated. It's going to be government mandated. I think is it already mandated in Canada? It's going to be mandated here in the US. So parents do not have a choice. If a school thinks that their kid that a kid could be trans, they socially transition the kid at school and they do not inform the parent. Right. And this is about to be government mandated. Biden's going to set up an EO about it. And this is terrifying because they are putting that kid in a trap, and that trap is a trap of it's both a trap of like a fixed identity, but it's a trap of total dissociation.
And also creating aggression within anybody who has that mindset against anyone who doesn't. Like very much sort of encouraging them, no, stand up for yourself, like don't take any guff from anyone. And that's where I get concerned, because I know, like, I have nephews and nieces and stuff, they're still going to Sunday school and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And so to think that they are going to be forced to deal with this choice between between honoring their parents and getting along at home and not, and going to school and having these expectations put on them to where they go home and now they don't trust their parents anymore, right?
Yeah.
That's
This
a
is a huge it's a huge problem because that is, did you know the word groomer is being
yeah,
banned from Twitter
yeah,
as hate speech?
yeah,
You can get banned from Twitter for calling
sure,
someone a groomer, but this is absolutely groomer behavior
yep,
to set up a situation that puts a child at odds with their parents who are their primary caregivers. These
yep,
are the parents are, there are rare cases of abuse, but parents
mm,
primarily are the people who are most invested in keeping a child safe. So to put a wedge between parents and kids, that is grooming behavior.
sure,
And to set up a situation where you have child adult secrets
yeah,
from parents,
yep,
that is predatory.
it
That is
starts,
grooming and predatory behavior. And I was going to go back to your observation about, your um discomfort and navigation of your own religion, and the thing that makes this so exponentially bigger is that it's not just it's not just someone sort of scaring you with the notion of hell, and it's not just threatened relationships with your families,
mm,
but this is threatened relationships with every single person on the planet.
sure,
You could lose your job, you
yep,
could lose your ability to have work, you could
yep,
lose all social access, and access to money.
mm-hmm,
They're going to do this thing now. Also, this is another thing that the US is going to do, but Title IX is going to extend into the home. And if a parent, quote unquote, misgenders their child, which is accurately sexing their child,
sure.
that parent could be arrested for sexual harassment under Title IX, the way that Biden's going to shift it. It's absolutely
It
insane.
is.
Um,
I
yeah.
didn't think that I didn't think that Biden could be worse than Trump. But at this point, it's like, at the very least, I feel I've said this elsewhere that I kind of feel that if Trump was still around, the certainty of war to me would be more likely. The certainty of violence and aggression in the streets. I feel like, and also with other countries as well. But what what's happening with the Biden administration, um, to me is like part of what I look at in this is I see certain things that Democrats do, and because of my familiarity with the conservative community, I'm like, well, I know that's not going to go over well. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so and so for me, when you start doing something like saying that a male is indistinguishable from a woman, and if you don't agree with that, then there's something wrong with you and you're a bigot. It's like you don't think that people are going to have a problem with that. I mean, and further to that, like you're just going to call all of them bigots, and you're just going to say that all of them are you know what I mean? It is an act of aggression, and there are people who will react violently. There will be retaliation. You can't just do something like that and just assume that everybody's going to fall in line. And if you do assume that everybody's going to fall in line, well, now you're turning into the dictator. And that's just sort of the I love the saying two wings, one bird. And in regards to the the party system, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yes, absolutely.
And just how when it's like, okay, 4 years of conservative ridiculousness followed by the opposite extreme. But then when you look at a lot of who's pulling the strings and where the incentivization of is coming from, it comes from people with money. right? It comes from people who have some sort of whether it's weapons manufacturing or it's gender surgeries and things of that sort. It's like um, uh, pick your poison in this regard. And
Mm.
there's I feel as though in some way this to me kind of reminds me of the Epstein situation and Maxwell, and just how when all of that was kind of coming out, I think there was an expectation from a lot of people, myself included, that this would be something that could pull the veil away and really show us sort of what's going on behind the scenes, and really kind of show humanity what's really happening. And what ended up happening was that was kind of followed by a lot of QAnon silliness, and kind of like taking the reality of these things and then putting this sort of demented twist on them, to where it's like now you can't effectively deal with it anymore, because you've taken a real thing and you've brought it into crazy town. And but that, I think, is the sort of unifying reality when you see pictures of both Trump and Clinton hanging around with Epstein. That it's like now you're starting to see the reality of the situation, and the
Yeah.
fact that there's really not much difference between one and the other when push comes to shove.
Oh, they
And
were family friends.
right.
You know, they went to the weddings of each other's children. They've been longtime friends.
Mm-hmm.
Those families, the Clintons and the Trumps. They're good
Sure.
friends.
Yep.
I was a never Biden. Biden promised to put this EO into place that changed the word sex to include gender identity, so effectively
Mm.
erasing sex in language of law and law.
Mm.
He promised to do that in his campaigning, and I was absolutely never going to vote for Biden. And then he followed through. He did that on his, I think, second day of the presidency. He put that through, or maybe
Sure.
the third day. I
Yeah.
forget, but it was in the first week.
Yeah, it's
It
pretty
was in the
quick.
first week of his presidency.
Yeah.
He erased women in language and law.
Mm.
And all of my, SJW friends were very concerned, like, oh, Trump's going to come after abortion. Well, the fact of the matter is, we cannot effectively fight for abortion, which is a bodily autonomy issue and women's reproductive issue. We cannot effectively fight for that if we cannot define the word woman in
Sure.
language and law. It's no longer a woman's issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a human issue,
Yeah.
and then I wanted to just sort of also say, like, going back to kids for a minute, kids need the reality around them affirmed. They need to be able to trust their own senses. They need to be able to claim authority over their own eyes and ears and what their eyes and ears see and hear. They need to be able to claim authority and name reality of the world around them. But if they are constantly in a world where they are unable to name their reality with authority, that is to strip them of bodily autonomy. They no longer have autonomy over what their own body sees and senses. So this is all very dangerous, and yeah, there's a lot of collusion involved from both sides, and the right has been more critical of this from the left, but I think we have to be really clear that everyone in a position of power makes money from this. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I said this figure during our last conversation, but this is a $5.2 trillion market.
Yeah.
This is according to Out Leadership on their home page. This is a vast global market. And like I said, everyone's involved. Apple's involved, Google's involved, Adobe, Intel is involved, Exxon is involved, IBM is involved. I mean, Citibank is involved, Bank of America is involved, every major corporation that you could, Amazon is involved, Amazon is involved. You know, every major corporation that you could imagine has money invested in this. They stand to profit from your child's medicalization.
Right.
Let that sink in.
Yeah.
You know, they would like to make your child a patient.
Sure.
I don't know if I said this when I was last here. This is research done by Alex Aaron, the gender mapper. She plots out in one of her videos. I wish I remembered the exact name of it, but she plots out point by point, and she'll show you the research right in front of your face. The CEO of Tumblr, which is one of the biggest sites for turning these kids, they call it cracking your egg, is finding this trans identity. This is where these kids, these young kids are doing all of their back and forth. The CEO of Tumblr got himself on the board of Planned Parenthood. What does big tech have to do with a women's health organization? Well, you know, a few years later, 1 or 2 years later, Planned Parenthood is they are no longer, their primary health care service is no longer women's health.
Wow.
It's no longer abortions and pap smears and handing out birth control and that sort of thing. Their primary service now is gender medicine.
Wow.
Their primary thing that they provide is hormones.
It's crazy. Yep.
Big tech
Right.
and parenthood,
Right.
they are creating a patient, and then they team together with GLSEN to get curriculum in the schools. So now there's this curriculum in the schools that everyone goes to. GLSEN is all over the schools in the United States, and I don't know if you guys use, I don't know if you use GLSEN or do you use the mermaids curriculum in Canada. I don't know. I should find that out. But this GLSEN curriculum is brought to you by the same people. It's, you know, sponsored by Planned Parenthood and Tumblr. So they are literally creating patients. They are creating the problem and then providing the solution. They are causing confusion and then providing a solid option.
Wow.
And these you know, plastic surgeons, there are marketing teams helping plastic surgeons figure out how to market on TikTok. There are plastic surgeons all over TikTok.
Sure. Yeah.
Marketing
That's crazy. Yep.
these surgeries to children. You know, the average age of a TikTok user is like 15. Why are plastic surgeons on there?
Yep.
Who are they marketing to?
Yep.
To children.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's what's unbelievable to me is to think that you would be a heretic for wanting to educate children properly and to help them trust their senses, and it's so bizarre how life can be like this, how the world can be like this, where it's like, you know, not to borrow the term, but, you know, good becomes evil and evil becomes good. And it's like things get twisted around to such a degree where the disentangling process that's like what's kind of scary, is to think of where does this go? And that's probably a good place for us to maybe start winding down, is this question of where does this go? Where now, if let's say we could say maybe 10 years down the line, by that point, society is able to wake up and say, oh, wow, look at what we did. That's horrible. Let's get our shit together. Or it just continues going. And that is my fear.
That is, I mean, that's my fear as well. I think, you know, if we don't see right now, I do think the vast majority of people agree with me. They're just too scared to say anything. And there is a lot of coercion and as you said, reversal. I am the one who wants to protect children in their healthy bodies from being mutilated and
Yeah.
sterilized and put on drug treatments for life. But there are, former friends who have accused me of being a danger to kids. Me, I am the one who wants kids to live
Right.
healthy lives in their healthy bodies,
Mm-hmm.
but because I do not believe that boys are girls and girls are boys, they say I am a danger. So this is to just give a concrete example of the kind of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
These are friends who formerly were like, you're amazing with kids, you're the best teacher, you're so great. And now, because I don't want kids to be cut, now I'm dangerous.
Yeah.
So
Burn the witch.
I think if enough people do not stand up, that kind of mentality is being allowed to exist. So we need a critical mass, as they say, of people to stand up and say, no, this is not okay, I don't agree with it. We're not going to go down this path. And if we do not stop this, if we do not nip it in the bud, the next thing that is coming is
Right.
transhumanism.
Yes.
You notice that the language of birth, this movement is specifically targeting mothers and the language of motherhood. So women are being called, chest feeders
Right.
and birthing bodies, and I made a sort of ironic, sardonic tweet the other day that was like, why don't we just call them incubation units, because that is going to be inclusive of non-human incubators for babies when we start having babies in a bag and
Yeah.
selling them.
Yeah.
This transhumanism is the technology that they are currently working on. They would like to steal. I mean, goes back to the friggin' sky gods. They would like to steal birth from women and take that power and put it in the power of men and scientists. And that is terrifying for multiple reasons, not only because of the vast dehumanization of women and mothers and the dehumanization of us all, but this is a baby market. This is a human slave trade. This is, if we start growing and manufacturing babies in bags, humans literally become a commodity. I mean, this already happens with surrogacy. That is why, every feminist worth her worth has a massive critique of the surrogacy industry. It's an industry. It's $1 billion industry marketing frigging children and selling women's wombs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horror show, but I'm not going to
a
get
picture that I saw the other day, and it was just two guys who were hugging and holding the baby, and in the background, blurred out, was like the mother. It was like, what a strange, sentiment.
Was she even a part of it? Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But it's selling babies. It's selling human beings. It makes babies a commodity. It's absolute sickness. But this is the end game of transhumanism. This is why there's all of that compartmentalization and commodification, like interchangeable parts. This is why we see television shows like, I think it's The Expanse, where they put their consciousness in, basically, I think they call themselves sleeves, literally.
Altered Carbon.
That show? Oh, Altered Carbon. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I knew it was one of those ones.
I actually did background on that show. I was doing some film industry stuff, and that was a fascinating set to be on, because I was there the day that they were doing. It was like a protest scene, and you had half the people were protesting for the right to be able to use a sleeve and transfer their consciousness from one body to the next, and then there were other people who were protesting, and it was like they were they were essentially like religious people saying that you lose your soul when you do this. But I, at the time, it was kind of a surreal experience for me. It was kind of like a profound awakening of like, is this where we're going? You know, is this what's happening? Where you have like bioessentialists versus transhumanists. And I do think that that is the conversation that we're really having here. It's something that I've talked about a couple of times, and you know, I've said this before. I'm a techie guy. I play video games. I'm aware of the community. I sort of know what's going on there, and the more that I've kind of chosen to be critical of my own community in the same way that I chose to be critical of my religion, the more that I've been able to see like, oh yeah, I can kind of see how this is sort of feeding into this. And it's a part of my kind of, as I was saying before, it's like when you're living life and you're just participating, just taking part in whatever it is, life itself, you know, society, it at some point, there's this strange, I guess maybe it has to do with turning 40. It's just kind of this strange sort of like, hey, not everything's good for you. And in the long term, how much do you really want to be accommodating this thing? There's this is a thought I had earlier, and I years ago I was looking into some different psychology things online, and I found this guy who had some interesting stuff to say. And I recall he was drawing a correlation between I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Gray. He's an artist, and he does a lot of like psychedelic art and things like that. He has a piece called "Gods and Demons Drinking from the Milky Pool," and it's a essentially it's like these different, we'll call them thought forms that are feeding off of the human experience. And that's kind of what the picture represents, and what he kind of talks about in this this guy. His name is Jonathan Zapp. He was talking about like you were saying before, information, the information, like when you kind of break things down into just information and emotion about something and just sort of see it as it's information. It's an interesting way of looking at life, for one thing, to kind of consider the possibility that everything on some level is all just information. And that is like, you know, that gets into some interesting existential stuff. But what he's talking about is that as human beings, we have a symbiotic relationship with ideas, that ideas attach themselves to us, and that it's almost like this symbiosis that happens. It's almost like, but in some cases, it's almost like a parasitic relationship, where it's like a thought form that attaches itself to you and it feeds off of a certain experience. So like, you know, whatever you can possibly think of, you know what I mean? It's like any addiction, any sort of compulsion or something like that. And I found that to be a pretty fascinating way of looking at things, of seeing the soul as kind of this incorruptible thing. Not that I'm saying I believe in souls, but, you know, I mean, as a metaphor, seeing it as this sort of pure incorruptible thing, but that it attracts these beliefs that we come through in our lives, and that these beliefs become in like a symbiosis with us, you know, and they're feeding off of us and our emotions. And
Well, the
go ahead.
problem is that we have this idea that our thoughts are our own, but our thoughts are highly intertwined with external programming.
Sure.
Whether that programming is early childhood programming, whether it's religious programming,
Sure.
educational programming, or cultural programming.
Right.
So, you know, feminists have these fights, for example, about makeup or shaving. And these are really nuanced side fights that
Sure.
happen. They're not that big of a deal. But when women tell me, well, I just I just like how shaving looks better. Well, where did you get that notion? Do you think animals in the wild have this like notion about cutting or shaving off different body parts in such a way. These are not thoughts that just appeared to you as an individual. These are programmed notions, and a lot of our notions are programs. These are cultural programs that are running like an externally added program. These are not necessarily natural to our humanity. It's not natural, it's just an external program that's running. And that's why a lot of psychological work is to separate me from my programming. So when I find myself caught in a mental loop or being on a mental treadmill, however you want to say it, I can look like, where is that thought coming from? Is that a thought I am thinking, or is that a thought that is being thought because I've habituated it because of the programming, because of the external programming. And there are a lot of things like this, different kinds of morality lessons, different kinds of cultural strictures, like this supreme importance put currently on kindness, kindness being everything. In this house, women's rights are human rights and Black Lives Matter and kindness is everything. This whole kindness is everything. Well, why is kindness more valuable than another value? Do I believe that, or is that a belief that I have assimilated and it's become its own program running in my brain? What if I think integrity is the highest value? Well, integrity is going to trump kindness to me then. It's going to change my behavior. So it's very important to know where you are situated, to pay attention to where you are situated. I am situated not just in my body and not just in the material universe. I am situated in a current time in history, in a current culture, with a current familial background, with current experiences. And you see this in trauma all the time, where you will see, I've been through trauma myself, so I've gone through this. But when you're in trauma, you have a certain loop that will be running that causes you anxiety, and it causes you to be hyper vigilant about your safety and protection. But the loop is a trauma response, and it was an effective fear-based response for the immediate traumatic scenario, but it is no longer an effective way to deal with your day-to-day world, and in fact it's a neurotic way to deal with your day-to-day world, because it's hard not to live in it, and you have to do a lot of work to recognize, okay, what is me and what is external to me? What thoughts are my own and what thoughts are the programs that are dictated by the culture? Like, even the notion that how we do civilization is somehow natural and inevitable and right. Well, it's what currently exists, but is this somehow the best way of doing humanity? Is it natural? Is it right? Is having systems like, I don't know, government institutions that control things, or police forces, like, is this the correct, best way to do humanity? Do I think that they are, or are these external to me? Are they a thought loop that I am in? And I'm not going on a defund the police thing. I'm just saying that how we structure our government and culture is is it's like a pretend game that we're all playing, but if you do not notice that this is arbitrary, if you think it is inevitable, then you are caught in thinking the thoughts that the culture thinks for
Hmm.
you,
Hmm.
because you can't, even pushing back at like two-party system, like like you're still thinking within the system. It's
Sure.
very hard to think yourself outside of
For
the
sure.
system. It's very hard to think unprogrammed
Hmm.
thoughts. It's very hard.
There's a kind of sports mentality that sort of exists. It's our team versus that team, and it's just a on some level, like when you just look at people and how they cheer for sports, it's oftentimes this just kind of, you give yourself over to the hatred of the other team because
Mhm.
there's something fun about it. There's something, you know what I mean? Like there's like, and that is what is disturbing about how things are playing out. And when you kind of see the pressure rising on both sides of the team, and you kind of are looking and that there's going to be a fight, something's going to happen, right? And then, but it's like in a sort of sporting environment situation, a lot of times that's what people want.
Mhm.
They want the
Mhm.
conflict. They,
Mhm.
it's and I I just love everything that we're talking about right now. I think it's so vitally important. I'm really glad that we were able to go down this road and kind of pull at these threads. I hope that anybody who listened and followed along with us, that, even though maybe it's not like, oh, we have all the answers, but I will say for myself is I don't like to be an all the answers kind of person. I'm sort of a all the questions kind of person. Let's ask the questions and get the answers out of that. um, and that's and so if you stop the questions, if you block the questions, if you don't give the opportunity for people to have their questions and talk about things, then it's like there's no consensus. And that, I think, is where the best forms of truth come out of, is when there is consensus, is when there's sort of an understanding of, this is what we're looking at over here and this is what you're looking at over here. Let's meet somewhere in the middle and come up with a solution that works for everyone. And right now, it's this sports mentality, us versus them kind of thing, is really on full display. And I really just, I love what you're talking about. I think that for anybody who is a seeker and trying to find some form of balance and grounding, it can be very difficult, because when you look out there and you kind of find all the different sort of opinions about what the path to self-realization is, and how to realize your best life, there's some conflicting opinions out there, and it's not always entirely clear. But I really appreciate your grounded perspective, and I think that it's unique. It's not something that's common, and it's also something that I understand why people might get upset, because um, truth is oftentimes a difficult thing for people to accept, especially if they're mired in their own idealism, whatever that is. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it is oftentimes very difficult, in fact, to weed through all the bullshit and try to find something that's of worth, that is tangible and meaningful. That is what is sorely needed, I think, in this discussion. And when we're talking about people who identify as trans and the reason that they do so, I think that a lot of them, there is this sort of underlying question of what is the best path to take, the best psychological model, the best sort of model of humanity, and how to deal with our solutions, or how to deal with our problems, how to come up with the right solutions. Um, that is something that I don't have figured out. I'm still I have a lot of confusion related to the confusion that exists in the world. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what the point of, I think, it's what's beautiful, actually, I think, about this moment in time, is the opportunity we have to actually have conversations like this, and
Yeah.
hopefully out of it comes something that people can latch onto, and that it finds root and bears fruit, right? There's my hope is that this is a symptom of a deeper issue, and that this is us dealing with those issues. And we can't see the end of the road yet necessarily, but I do hope that all of this frustration is to hopefully get to a point of greater balance for everyone. And if that's what this is all about, if that's what we're going through in order to get to that place, then it's something that I hope to see within my lifetime. But I also think that it might also just have to do with the individual and how you choose to create this in your own life, despite what's going on in the outside world. And that is a real challenge, because even if you try to create your best life, a lot of times people will get upset with you just for trying to do that. But I'm glad that we can have this conversation, Amy. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your insights. And for anybody who is watching, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I feel like it's a good place to kind of leave with a final thought. So is there anything that you want to say before we end this here?
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation as well. And I welcome anyone who has further questions. Feel free to follow me. Twitter is my biggest site. You can follow me at Known Heretic on Twitter. I'm currently building a website that is called, it's up, it's live. It's just, it needs work still, but it's called Little Red Reverberations. So I'm going to be doing a lot more online classes and in-person events, because I'm really passionate about giving people these skills, and I hope that people will build more emotional resilience for themselves and have more of a sense of their own embodied awareness. And I do think that we're facing a very dangerous cult, and I have a lot of skepticism about the direction that we're heading in, but I'm also going to do everything that I possibly can to help us move down a different path. So if anyone is interested in, trying to go down that path with me, I really welcome your communication and participation.
Your existence gives us a better shot, Amy.
Thank you.
The fact that you're out there doing what you're doing is great, and I think it's special. And I always look forward to your posts, and anybody who wants to follow Amy and hear what she's got to say, there's a lot of rabbit trails out there to go down, but I do feel that you are the real deal, and you've got a lot of really great things to say, and I definitely appreciate you being here and this conversation.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See you then.